A couple of years ago, when Mississippi State was in the College World Series final game, friends of mine couldn't use their tickets, and so he called me up, and do you want to go? And I go, oh, yeah. So Doug and I went to the game, and the seats were up near the box section, and we were enjoying the game, and at one point I needed to use the restroom. So I got up and went to the restroom, and there was a line back there with all those seats, about a box seat, and I thought, well, that's weird. There's a line to the men's restroom. But I got in line, and then these two big guys came, and they started to go around the line, and I said, excuse me, there's a line. And they said, what? There's a line to the men's restroom? I said, yeah, look, we're all standing here. So they were big guys, but they got behind me, and I thought, I don't know who they are, but then a cop showed up to stand with them. And I thought, that's weird. Are they criminals? Why would they be in the box section? Clearly they're not criminals. So I think they're like security for these two guys. I don't know who they are. So went in, used the restroom, and they used the restroom and came out, and I told Doug, I think there's somebody important back there, because he has like a cop escorting him. And then a few minutes later, they showed him on the screen. It was Dak Prescott, who's the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, and he had played for Mississippi State. And I think, I told Dak Prescott to get behind me in line. If I'd have known who it was, I would have said, do you know my cousin Greg? Because at that point, Greg was kicking for the Cowboys. Could have had a nice little conversation as we stood at the urinal together. Hey. But we have within us, kind of from the time we're born, this notion of rightness, of fairness. And somebody getting ahead of you in line it makes you grumpy. Like when you're standing in line and somebody's saved a place for a whole bunch of people and they get ahead of you, you're like, hey, we're all here, you butt ahead of us. And I'm sure that for most of us, when we hear today's gospel, we think, not fair. That's just not fair, Jesus. Some of those guys worked 12 hours, and some worked an hour, and they all got paid the same. That would never go over with unions. I mean, Jesus, I don't think the unions would be at all happy with you. This doesn't seem fair. But Jesus is a master storyteller, and you have to pay attention to little things in the story. Because Jesus is really not talking about things here on earth. And the listeners in Jesus' day, having been steeped in the Old Testament, when they heard it was a vineyard, they would have known that the Old Testament prophets, whenever they were talking about God and the kingdom, they used the image of a vineyard. And Jesus said right at the beginning, the kingdom of heaven is like this. Now he's responding to a discussion that went on right before he tells this story. And here's what it was. This rich young man had come up to Jesus and said, what did he have to do to inherit everlasting life? And Jesus said to him, follow the commandments. You know what they are. And the guy says, I've followed them all. I've done all that since I was young. And then Jesus says, well, you have to do one more thing. Sell everything you have, give it to the poor, come and follow me. And the rich young man walks away sad because he just can't give up his stuff. And then Peter says, having watched the young man walk away, Peter says, Jesus, we gave up everything So what's in it for us? And this is Jesus' response. He tells Peter this story so that Peter can begin to understand that God's ways are different than our ways. Because God is generous. If we would read the story in its original version, what the master agrees to pay the first group, translated for us as the usual daily wage, is a denarii. What he says to all the others is, I'll pay you what's fair. But the daily wage is a denarii. It also was the amount it costs to live. So to live in those days, every day, cost you a denarii. For lodging and for food, it cost a denarii. So it was, why he had to pay at the end is because that's actually the law in the Old Testament. You had to pay your laborers every day because they had to buy food and they had to pay for lodging. So he gives them the denarii. They all get a denarii. The thing that's a little bit odd in the story is why the master pays the last ones first. Because he could have avoided the whole conflict if he would have paid the guys who had worked 12 hours first. Because they would have left. They just would have, okay, we got our wage, gone home. But because he takes the guys who only worked an hour and gives them a denarii, then the other guys are thinking, wow, we worked 12 hours. We're probably going to get 12 denarii because they got a denarii for working 1 hour. They were thinking they were going to get a lot. As the story says, the master did not cheat anybody. Everybody agreed for whatever he would pay. And he gives them the daily wage. Nobody gets cheated. But it isn't exactly fair. Because the point is, God isn't fair in the way we think. Now, most of us, when we hear that story, think that we're the people who worked the 12 hours. Didn't you? It's like, yeah, it's not fair. How many here thought they were the person who only worked an hour? Oh, good. Because that's how we should hear it. We should hear it as if we were the ones at the end of the day. Because really, if we're honest, folks, if God was fair, we would not be happy. If we were honest, what have we done? How have we lived? We really don't want God to be fair. The God of Jesus is a God who's generous and merciful and loving, not fair. Thank goodness. Because none of us would make it. We wouldn't be there in the kingdom. God is generous to each of us. And that's the important thing we need to hear in this story. God's generous. We're going to get everything we need and more. The problem with us is that we have not just a notion of fairness, we have envy. Envy gets mixed up with our notion of fairness. Any of you who've worked with children know that. It's right there. I heard a story the other day. His family went down to Nebraska City to get apples. They came back with their apples. Their oldest son said, "Dad, can I have an apple?" "Sure, we got all kinds of apples." So he gives an apple to the oldest son. Then his little sister says, "Can I have an apple?" And initially the older son was fine with his apple. It was a lovely apple. But his little sister got an apple that was a little bit bigger than his. And then he was mad because she got a bigger apple. "Why did she get a bigger apple?" "Well, it just was the one I grabbed." But he was mad, and he was sad then. He was happy initially, "I'm going to have an apple." And now he's mad, sad, because envy got in the way. Instead of simply being thankful. I got an apple. Yeah, be thankful. It's when envy gets into us that we have these problems. And maybe we have it in our relationship with God. Maybe we're mad at God sometimes. Those people over there get everything. I get nothing. Come on, God. What's wrong with you? No, look, you've got a lot. But because we're envious, we're mad. Mad at God. So the solution to that is gratitude. We need to be thankful. So the next time you're complaining about something, I suggest in your prayer when you're complaining to also stop for a moment and say thank you. To thank God for a little bit. And maybe that complaining might go away. Or at least it'll be where it belongs. That the thank yous to God are really important. Because God is incredibly generous. And so we need to say thanks. This is the Sunday when we give out the annual report. It's at the doorways. It was mailed to your homes. Probably most of you have looked at it already. If not, I encourage you to look at it. But it's our once a year, required by church law, to report to you how we spent your gifts to us. But it's really just a chance for us at the parish to say thank you. Thank you for being a generous people. It's a thank you to God, to you, for all that we did this past year. Because we are blessed. Yeah, we're not some big, fancy West Omaha parish. I don't want to be that. We are who we are. And you're generous, and I thank you. It'll show you what we did with your gifts. Some major estates that we received, their major gifts, have been put aside. So the bottom line looks really good. But we've been putting it aside for the chance to turn that swimming pool over in the parish center into a nicer hall. So you'll be hearing more about that as the months go by. But thank you. God has blessed us in this vineyard we work in. And we haven't put in a whole lot of time, just an hour. But God blesses us and is generous with us. And we're thankful.